Gentlemen, let's get started. I am very happy to see you all again here. We will switch to English again, of course. We have done all our tests. All tests are negative very well, so we can get started. Welcome to the second semester. We will continue with the topic which we had already in the first semester with ASP.NET Core. And today we will dedicate the morning to a very, very important subtopic, which is security. We will talk how to properly and professionally secure web APIs using a protocol which is called OpenID Connect and Azure Active Directory. So we will use the school's Azure Active Directory to protect a web API to access Azure Active Directory to read all users, groups, and things like that. We will write our own API and make sure that only members of our school can access this API. That was the reminder for the tests, but they already are negative, so that's fine. Before we get started with ASP.NET, let me quickly ask you, what do you know about OpenID Connect or its predecessor OAuth 2? Have you heard about these protocols already? So you told me that you don't know a lot about OpenID Connect and OAuth 2. OpenID Connect and OAuth 2 are two protocols which are built on each other. Today we are going to talk about OpenID Connect. We are not going to talk about OAuth because OAuth is the predecessor. It is below OpenID Connect. We are just talking about OpenID Connect. But if you hear OAuth on the internet, you have to think, okay, that's the old version or the reduced version of OpenID Connect. We will talk about the protocol OpenID Connect. By the way, if the students in distance learning want to see me, I can turn on my camera if you want. Okay, better like that. So what's the core idea of OpenID Connect? Believe me, it's a super, super, super important protocol. And every web developer, every mobile developer has to know about it. There is practically no system on earth which is non-trivial, which does not use OAuth or OpenID Connect today. Some of the systems are really oriented and implementing the standard. Some of them are kind of implementing the standard, but the principles are everywhere the same. Google, OpenID Connect. Microsoft, OpenID Connect. Twitter, GitHub, all of them use OpenID Connect. All of them. So it is important to understand the general principles of OpenID Connect. We will not discuss the entire protocol in programming, in systems in programming here in this class. It is something which you might discuss in Netzwerk- und Verbundsysteme. Maybe, I don't know. But I have to teach you the fundamentals of OpenID Connect before we can take a look at authentication and authorization in ASP.NET Core. Okay? So listen closely. Once you come to your internship or when you work in a company, knowing about OpenID Connect is a real benefit. It's really important that you understand it. And first, we have to talk about the general principles. Now, what is the core idea of OpenID Connect? I have a small diagram here, and we will take a look at it. First, in OpenID Connect, we talk about the so-called resource owner. The resource owner is the user who is using a system. It's you. If you use GitHub, if you use Office 365, you are the resource owner. You are the owner of your email inbox, of your calendar, of your GitHub repositories, whatever. You're using a client app. A client app can be a desktop app, can be a mobile app, can be a web application, can be an Angular application, can be a Node.js application, can be any kind of client application. In our case, we will focus on single-page apps because in parallel to this course, you are learning about Angular. And we will take a look at Angular today, okay? The client is an Angular client. So the resource owner, the human being, is using an Angular client to access a protected resource. This is the API that you are going to develop. This is your API, the API that we are going to develop in C# in ASP.NET Core. This could be in practice your calendar, could be your email inbox, could be your whatever project you do. This is the protected resource. The protected resource will not allow somebody without authentication to access the API. Only you can take a look at your calendar, nobody else. Now, in the good old times, login and authentication and authorization was built into the protected resource and the client. The client presented a login screen with user and password. The user entered user and password, clicked on login, and then sent the user and password to the protected resource. The protected resource had username and passwords, checked username and passwords, everything is okay. Have you ever built a system like that anywhere in the last 4 years in some programming classes? Probably you have implemented some kind of login like that. And that's today no longer appropriate. You shouldn't do that. That's kind of old style. What is the problem? The problem is that in many cases the client here, this client, is developed by somebody completely different than the protected resource. Imagine you are writing your final year project and you have an idea. You would like to post something in the name of the user on Facebook, for instance. Then you are writing the client and Facebook built the Facebook API. It doesn't make sense that you are asking the user for username and password. You should not have the user's password for Facebook. Understand what I mean? You as the client developer, as a user, I don't want to give you my password. And as Facebook, they also don't want you to have the password. The only guy who should know the password is the resource owner, not the client, because the client isn't trusted. Maybe the client is hacked. Maybe the client contains some malicious software. That's not good. The second thing is that a company like Facebook or Microsoft or GitHub, they want to provide their own login servers because they know how to build them and they know how to secure them. So the core idea of OpenID Connect is that there is a separate authentication server. An authentication server like Office 365. More technical, Azure Active Directory. An authentication server like GitHub, like Twitter, like Facebook. Well, Facebook and OpenID Connect, we can discuss that. It's kind of OpenID Connect what they do. The workflow works like this. The resource owner would like to use the client app, your Angular app. This client app would like to access the protected resource, but it would like to access the protected resource as the identity of the resource owner. Your Angular app would like to go to, let's say, the Office 365 API and say, hey, Rainer Stropek is sitting in front of me. I, client app, am acting in the name of my resource owner, Rainer Stropek. Get the idea? So it's a kind of trust delegation, delegated access. As a user, I'm allowing a client app, an Angular app, to act on my behalf. That's the idea. Delegated access means client app, it's okay that you pretend that you are Rainer Stropek. I give you the access. Now, how does that work? The resource owner directly talks to the authorization server, and that's an important one. The resource owner never enters the password directly in your Angular app. Never. You are not providing the login screen. This is not done by you. On the contrary, what you do is you are either redirecting the user to the login server, in our case Office 365, or you are displaying a pop-up window where you display a small login screen but not coming from your app. You are not implementing a login screen at all. No login screen. Less work for you. It's good news, isn't it? You're redirecting the user to the authentication server. In the authentication server here, magic happens. The user enters his password. Maybe the user presents a fingerprint. Maybe the user uses Face ID. Maybe an SMS or message is sent. Maybe an authenticator app is used. Whatever magic happens, that's not your task. Next, the authentication server generates a so-called token. This token contains information about who is the resource owner. This is Rainer Strobeck. I made sure it is really Rainer Strobeck because I checked his fingerprint. It contains some claims about Rainer Strobeck. First name, last name, email address, and things like that. Maybe groups that Rainer is in. And it's digitally signed. It's signed by the authentication server. So the authentication server, for instance, Azure Active Directory, says, I checked that. It's me, Azure Active Directory. Whoever gets this token can be sure that I did my very best to ensure that this is Rainer Strobeck. Additionally, the token is created for a certain audience. So the resource owner has to ask the authentication server, I need a token for this specific protected resource. For instance, my email inbox, my calendar. Understand what I mean? Then the resource owner takes this token, and by redirecting in the browser, it gives the token to the client. And now we are in your Angular app. Your Angular app has never seen the user's fingerprint. Your Angular app has never seen a username or password. Nothing like that. All it gets is a token. Now this token can then be used to access the API. So the token is sent to the protected resource. The protected resource takes a look and says, is this a token for this client app? Okay, it is. Is this a token where the resource owner has proven that he is the guy he claims to be? Yes, that's the case. Is this the token that was created for me, audience? It's like traveling to Russia. Try to enter Russia with a visa from China. It doesn't work. You need a visa for Russia to enter Russia. Understand what I mean? And that's the same here. The audience has to match. And when all these things are given, only then the API will grant access to the protected resource. So the real core ideas that you absolutely have to remember and understand is the client never gets the password or biometric information. Therefore, the client cannot misuse it. First. Second, there has to be a trust between the authentication server and the protected resource. The protected resource has to know about the authentication server. In your API, you have to decide which authentication service do I trust. Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, whatever you do. Understand? And then your API can take a look at these tokens and say, okay, I grant this token access. Does that sound complicated? It is. It is a complicated protocol. The good news is that for simple scenarios, you have really good APIs. For Angular, you have nice NPM packages. For C#, you have nice NuGet packages. For Java, you have nice packages. For Kotlin, you have nice packages. For Swift, you have nice packages. And that's the beauty of a standard. Because once you have a standard, somebody can implement a really nice library for that standard, and everybody who follows that standard can immediately benefit from these libraries. But the protocol on the wire isn't trivial. So please do never try to implement OpenID Connect by hand on your own. It doesn't make sense. It's too complicated. Just use libraries. Find a library that fits to your development technology. Do you understand the benefits? Why this is better than just presenting a user in the login screen? Yeah? Another big benefit is called single sign-on. Do you know what single sign-on is? Nearly. You cannot use the token, but you can use your username. and password and biometrics. Exactly. For instance, my company, we are offering a software as a service solutions for companies. We are a business-to-business software provider. Our customers can use their existing Office 365 to log into our service. They don't have to create a new user for our service. They just use their existing, as you said, their existing user credentials. Therefore, they need one password less, no additional password. And that's very, very nice. Have you ever accessed, I don't know, a system on the web that has not been created by Google, but still you're using your Google account? I bet you have. That's single sign-on. That is single sign-on. And that is also something which is enabled by OpenID Connect. Understand what I mean? Single sign-on. Have you ever heard the term single sign-off? Now that's strange, right? Single sign-on, everybody understands that. But you know what? Single sign-off is even more complicated. Imagine you have a browser. You have multiple tabs open in that browser. In the first tab, you're signing in to application A with your Google account. In the second tab, you are signing into application B with your Google account. And on the third tab, you are signing into application C with your Google account. Now on the third tab, you press logout. This is a computer maybe in a public library. And because you pressed logout, you leave the library and you think everything is fine. What did you forget? Tab 1 and 2. Because there you also signed in with your Google account. So somebody can go to this public computer, switch to tab 1, and do something strange with your account because you're still signed in with your Google account. That would be a real threat if there weren't single sign-out. Single sign-out means if you sign out in a single browser from any account, then you sign out from all the applications inside of this session. That is single sign-out. Or even from any application that is running on this computer. And implementing single sign-out is even more complicated than implementing single sign-on. That is why it is a good idea, because many developers screw that up, it is a good idea if you sign out from a public computer to always close the browser entirely, not just relying on the fact that you have signed out in one tab. Understand what I mean? Banks typically force you to do that. Good. Nice. And what I want to do today in the remaining 2 hours is I would like, together with you, implement a protected resource in ASP.NET Core, and I would like to implement a client app in Angular in order to check how these token flows and so on work. So you can take this example and apply it, for instance, to your final year project. Maybe your final year project wants to use Google Auth or Microsoft Office 365 Auth or something like this. And this is my goal. I would like you to have the skills to build an API and an Angular app that is protected by OpenID Connect and our school's Azure Active Directory. That is our goal today, okay? We will check that. Now, it is 8:50. We are perfectly in time, so we will now make a short break. I ask you, you all know the drill, to open the windows for a few moments, to open the door so that we have a little bit of wind going through. Maybe you want to go out if it's too cold, and we will close it in a few minutes. And for those who are in distance learning, we will continue, let's say, in 10 minutes at 9, okay? We will continue at 9. I just talked to Professor Lackinger, and he told me that you will learn in N4S more about details like JSON Web Tokens and so on. So it's perfectly fine if we are not covering the details. We are trying to program with OpenID Connect, and yeah, in N4S you will learn the details about the protocol. Good. Let's start coding and let's start working. We are really lucky because here in the school we have our own Azure Active Directory with Office 365. And therefore, we have one of the most widespread authentication servers on Earth. which is very, very relevant for your professional career, and we can play with it. So you should be able to follow along. What you can do is you can try to go to portal.azure.com. Then you're going to be asked for username and password. And you can use your Office 365 account with which you typically log in to Teams, for instance. In my case, this account is the account r.stropek@htblleonding.onmicrosoft.com. Please try to sign in to portal.azure.com with your account. And give me feedback if it doesn't work. For those students who are in distance learning, I ask you to ask questions if you have any problems following along, okay? I record everything, so if you have internet problems or whatever, you can retry the sample at home later, but it would be nice if you try to follow along. Does anybody have problems signing in to portal.azure.com? You shouldn't have. Good, very good. The area where we are going to work is Azure Active Directory. Please take a look for Azure Active Directory and open Azure Active Directory. This is our school's Office 365 Azure Active Directory. And one word of warning here. Don't try to tamper with any kinds of users, groups, or whatever. Don't do that. It is in your best interest that you don't try to, I don't know, do stupid things in Azure Active Directory. Because if you do, the administrators will probably limit our permissions very much, and then we cannot do a lot of the experiments which we can currently do. So please, yeah, no stupid ideas, okay? The areas where we are going to work is here, app registrations, and a little bit enterprise applications. But our main focus is this one, app registrations. What we are going to do in app registrations is we are going to register, you see it here, we are going to register our client app inside of our authentication server. So we are going to tell Azure Active Directory, hey Azure Active Directory, there is a client app with which we would like to sign in using Azure Active Directory. The second thing which we are going to do is we are going to tell Azure Active Directory that there is a protected resource. This will be our API. So we have to register both things, client app and API, with our authentication server. This is what we are going to do in Azure AD. Let's do that. Let's go to app registrations. I have already tried whether everything works properly yesterday. So as you can see here, I have already 2 applications here registered which are owned by me. In your area, this should probably be empty now. Is that correct? Yes. Good. You can now try new registration, which you see here, in order to register a new application. Let's do that. Let's choose a meaningful name. For CHEF, underscore, let's use your name, okay? Like, I don't know, this one, demo client. Let's use something like this so that the administrators of Office 365 in our school, so that they know what we are creating here and they don't wonder, hey, what this app is all about. So please use it. Of course, don't use my name. I think that should be obvious. Now the next thing that we have to decide, is mainly these 2 options here. The other options are pretty obvious. Take a look at them. You can guess them from the content of from the context here. But the first 2 ones are not that trivial. Let's talk about that. The first one, accounts in this organization's directory only, is a so-called single tenant app. That means you are creating an app which is only for HTL Leonding. Only users of the HTL Leonding can sign on to this app. If you have another company, like my company, we have Office 365 too, we could not use your app. If you have another school who is using Office 365, they couldn't use your app. Your app is just for this organization. That's called single tenant. Remember that. I might ask you that in an exam. What is a single tenant app? And then you should say, a single tenant app is an app which only works for users in a single Azure Active Directory, in a single organization. Now the second thing is multi-tenancy, multi-tenant app. A multi-tenant app is an app that you create once, that you deploy once, that you run once, but users from multiple Azure Active Directory organizations can use it. So you can deploy your app, and any school that is using Azure Active Directory can sign into this app. My company, we could sign into your app. That is a multi-tenant app. Tenant in German, if you translate it, it's a Mieter. Like in a multi-story home, for instance, in a large building, you have multiple tenants, Mieter. Everyone has a separate part of the building, but you have multiple people living in, or multiple families living in the same house. And that's the same here, okay? So multi-tenancy, users from multiple Azure Active Directory organizations can sign in. Building a single tenant app is much easier than building a multi-tenant app. So therefore, we are going to use the first option because we are currently just learning. The redirect URI down here is optional and you can currently ignore it. Just ignore it. Press register. Was that difficult? Probably not, right? We have registered our client app and now comes two very, very important IDs. You absolutely have to remember them, and typically they are present in any OpenID Connect provider. Google has something similar, Twitter has something similar, GitHub has something similar. It's these two IDs here. The first one, this one, is the identifier. The identifier identifying the client app. So it's the ID representing that guy here. This is the client app. And in Azure Active Directory, this client app is identified using this ID. Now the second ID, this one, the directory tenant ID, is the identifier of our school's Azure Active Directory implementation. Everybody who is using Azure Active Directory, every organization who is using Azure Active Directory has its own Azure Active Directory tenant. Understand? So my company has a different directory tenant ID. Another HTL might have a different directory tenant, not might have, will have a different directory tenant ID. The tenant ID is important. We have to remember that we have these two IDs. Our app, this one, is registered in a certain directory tenant. Understand? This is typical for B2B offerings. So for organizations like schools and businesses and any kind of organizations. If you are working in a B2C area, business to consumer, think of Google for instance, there is typically no directory tenant ID. In their business offerings, they have something like this. But in the consumer offerings, it's just a user and a password. I don't work in an organization. Do you understand what I mean? So the context of an organization is something that is typical for companies. And here we have Azure Active Directory. We are here in an organization, in a school, and therefore we have a directory ID. Good. Now we want to specify how users can authenticate. How users can authenticate with our app. Please go to Authentication. The first thing that we have to specify is we have to specify the platform on which we will build our client app. So please click on Add a Platform. Now the choices here on the right-hand side should be pretty obvious for you. As you can see here, you can choose whether you're building a web app, and that means a web app with a server part, something like ASP.NET Razor Pages, Java, Python, Node.js, Go, something like this. The second option is the single page application here. Single page application would be React, Vue, Angular, something like this. Mobile and desktop apps, iOS, macOS, Android, and any kind of mobile and desktop application which is not listed up here. In our example today, this is a programming course which is working together with the N4S course. Therefore, we are going to use single page app because we are going to implement the client using Angular technology. We have to specify a redirect URI. This is not super important for our scenario because we are going to use a pop-up window because I think it's more beautiful. But some browsers, as you know, they don't support pop-up windows, or some users, they have disabled a pop-up window. And if you have pop-up windows disabled, the access token will be sent to you via an HTTP redirect. And then Azure Active Directory has to know where it should send the token to in case of redirect. And therefore, we have to specify the redirect URI. This means, hey, Azure Active Directory, once you created the token, please send it to this URI. Okay? In our case, as I said, we are going to use a pop-up window. Therefore, it's not that relevant. But still, we have to provide something. Please do that. HTTP localhost. Can anybody remember the typical port on which Angular applications run locally? Correct, 4200, right. Because of time constraints, we are not talking about single sign-on currently. Everything else is perfectly fine, ignore it. The implicit grant and hybrid flow are for rather old single-page apps. We are not going to talk about them. It's for legacy apps. Click on Configure. Good. Now, please take a look at this note here. For this course, it is not absolutely necessary to understand the details and know the details about what's written here. But you have to remember it at least in the back of your minds. If somebody tells you or asks you, which flow did you use for OpenID, then your answer should be, we use the authorization code flow with PKCE. That's the flow we are going to use. Authorization code flow with PKCE. That's the most modern authentication flow for single-page apps on the internet. If you want to know all the details about this protocol, Google it. We only have a limited amount of time in this course. It's not absolutely relevant that you know all the details of this protocol. It's implemented by the NuGet packages and NPM packages. But still, if you are interested, if you want to become, I don't know, a security professional or a penetration tester, or you want to, I don't know, hack a login server because what you do is, I don't know, white hat hacking for some security firm, then you should definitely Google it and understand everything about this protocol. If you just want to apply it, you should know that it exists, but you don't have to understand all the details. The libraries will make sure everything works fine. Good? Authorization code flow with PKCE. Nice. Now we have a single-page app. If you want, you can click on branding, and you can, for instance, change the name here. As I told you, let's stick with this name here. If you want, you can upload a logo. You can enter, I don't know, some kind of URL, and so on and so on. It's not that important. It will just be the nice branding that the user sees when he logs into your application. Are we good? Good. Next is API permission. Because our application currently, as it is, would already allow a user to sign in. You can already build an Angular app. You can specify username, password, if you have configured it, biometric stuff, and you can authenticate, and the Angular app has a proof that the user is who he claims to be. But we know that we want to access some protected resources. For instance, we would like to access the user's profile. We would like to be able to read the user's profile picture, his first name, his last name, maybe his email address, if registered, a telephone number, things like that. For that, we need to access an API. The first API that we are going to access is not an API that we build on our own. We are going to access an API which is provided by Microsoft. It is a REST API, an HTTP API, just like we did it before, but it is provided by Microsoft. Now I have to ask you, have you ever heard about an API which is called Graph API? Microsoft Graph. Here you see it. Have you heard about that? No? It's also a very, very important API in practice because many companies use Office 365 and therefore many have a Graph API. Because every company that is using Office 365 has a Graph API. Now, what can you do with the Graph API? Essentially, everything you can do with Office 365. Through the Graph API, you can read your emails, you can send emails, you can read your calendar, you can create calendar items, you can schedule Teams meetings, you can send messages via Skype, you can take a look at all your colleagues, read the people directory, read the users, create groups. All the applications that Microsoft provides in the context of Microsoft 365 are available through the Graph API. It's a huge API. It contains hundreds, if not thousands, of API endpoints. And that's the central point of programming with Microsoft 365. And what we can now do here in API permission is we can ask that our client, our Angular app, gets access to this API. How do we do that? Please go to API permissions. We are still in your client app. If anybody who is in distance learning has problems, please let me know. Turn on your mic and ask questions if you want. Now here in the Graph API, you see that by default, every client is capable of reading the user's profile. The user who has signed in has a certain profile, and this profile data can be queried using the permission user.read. Here you see the description, sign in and read user profile. That is the permission for reading our current user's profile. Please spin up Google and Google for Microsoft Graph Explorer. You will probably immediately get one link which leads us to the Microsoft Graph Explorer. It's a nice interactive tool where we can try and play around with all the different APIs that Microsoft Graph will give us. Please sign in here to your Graph Explorer. Of course, you will sign in with your HTL credentials. Probably you don't have to enter anything. You can just select the account. I will do that, my HTL account. Now we get asked whether a Graph Explorer app is allowed to access some data on your behalf. Yes, we are fine because we want to use the Graph Explorer. So let's accept that. And now we are signed in. And do you see this one? Get started, my profile. That is exactly the API that I was talking about. So you can now click on this My Profile and click on Run Query. And if you take a look down here, you will see the data of your profile. This is the API that we are currently allowing our Angular app to access. And this is the URL for this API. We will need that URI in a few moments. And if you take a look, if you fold this Get Started and take a look what you can do, there is really a lot that you can do. For instance here, emails. Send an email, forward an email, change your inbox rules, get all the emails from a certain address, and so on and so on. All these APIs are available here. If you want, you can browse through this API in your spare time. Maybe you can use some of these APIs for your final year project, and you can use the Graph Explorer to just interactively play with them. Okay? But for now, we will go back to our Azure Active Directory, and now we understand what this means. It says our client, our Angular app, should have access to the user's profile, to the profile of the user who is currently signed in. Do you want to have more permissions? I do. I want to have more permissions. So add a permission. Here you see all the different applications which live in the Microsoft universe. Microsoft has a lot of software as a service offerings. And for us currently, this one, you now know what the Microsoft Graph is. This one is relevant for us. Microsoft Graph. Please select Microsoft Graph. And then we have to make an important decision. Do we want to use delegated permission or application permissions? Let me describe the difference. Delegated permissions are permissions where the end user, the resource owner, can you remember what we had in the morning? Resource owner is the human being sitting in front of the computer, where the human being is allowing the client app, your Angular app, to work with this API on his or her behalf. So when I sign in with my teacher account on your Angular app, I am delegating the permission to your Angular app to talk to the Graph API on my behalf. Your Angular app can pretend to be me. That's fine. That is delegated permission. The second one, application permission, is different. Application permission means there is no human being. Nobody will sit in front of the computer and sign in. That will not happen. The application itself should have the permission to access some APIs. It could be a background service. It could be a Windows service running on your computer, posting something on Facebook, or we are here in the Microsoft universe, so sending an email every 5 minutes. Nobody will sit in front of the computer. No human being will allow the application to do something. The application itself, with its own identity, should be able to do something. That would be application permission. You don't fully understand what I mean with that? I have good news. We will not do that in this course. So, for this course, only this one is relevant. So, please check delegated permission. Now down here, you see all the different APIs which are available here in Azure Active Directory. And what we are looking for is user. If you scroll down a little bit, you should find user. And what I want is this one. I would like to be able to not only read my own profile, but I would like my Angular application to be able to read all the users' profile in our school. It is obvious that all the students inside of our school are registered inside of Office 365 because otherwise you couldn't use Teams. We are currently in a Teams meeting with the students in distance learning. This permission here allows our Angular app to go to Office 365 and make queries about what users exist. We don't have write access, so we can't change users, but we can read them. So I ask you to click Read Basic All. Can you find that one? Yeah. Once you have, click on Add Permission, and now you should see down here these two permissions for your client. Let me know if you have any problems. The difference between read all and read basic all is the number of fields that you get access to. Please wait for another few moments. You will understand in more details what these permissions are really all about. So it's not really you might currently have a wrong picture in your mind what permission means. We are not really giving the Angular app a permission. What we currently do is we are just saying our Angular apps need this permission. The one who will really give the permission is the end user. That's the idea here. We cannot allow your Angular app to do something. We have delegated permission. So the end user, Rainer Stropek, I am sitting in front of your Angular app. When I sign into your Angular app, you know what Azure Active Directory will do? They will show me a screen telling me, hey Rainer, if you sign into this app, you have to understand that this app can do this, and that on your behalf. Are you fine with that? And if you press yes or accept, then the Angular app gets the permission. Only then. If you have, maybe you are writing an Angular app and you invite me as a teacher to use your Angular app. And I see that your Angular app is suddenly requesting permissions to send emails on my behalf. And I don't trust you fully. I will probably not log in. I will probably say, no, I'm not going to use this client. So these permissions aren't really the permissions that we give the app. These are just the permissions that we request for the app. Giving the permission is something that only the user is able to do later on. Can you remember what we did in the Graph Explorer? When you signed in, you got this screen where Azure Active Directory asked you, hey, user, you're using the Graph Explorer. The Graph Explorer is going to access your profile information, for instance. That was a consent screen. If you don't trust the Graph Explorer, if you don't want the Graph Explorer to get your email address, you shouldn't sign in. It's similar to a mobile phone. If you download an app from the App Store, you get a display. You get a question whether you are okay with the app doing something with your phone, reading your messages, for instance. That's exactly the same, but in the context of OpenID Connect. Good? Fine? Any further questions? Nice. So I'm happy with that. We should be good. We should be good to go. Now we can implement an Angular web app accessing the user's profile. This is what we are going to do next. Our goal is, let's say we now have reached level 1. Level 2 will be our own client, and level 3 will be not using just the existing Microsoft Graph, but in level 3 we will build our own API and protect the API of our own, just like we protect Graph API. Are you all on board? Everything's fine? Anybody in distance learning having problems understanding what I'm telling you? Once you understand the concepts, clicking through these few buttons isn't very complicated. The concepts are the difficult thing. Good. So let's make some Angular. I know we are here in the C# course, but having an API without a user interface doesn't make any sense. So yes, in the next few minutes, we are going to write a little bit of Angular. The first thing that I'm going to ask you is please come up with a command prompt and make sure that you have the latest version of the Angular CLI installed. So please do the following. npm install -g, like global, @angular/CLI. This will update the Angular CLI on your computers. Please do that. Now please go in any directory where you can create a new Angular app. We will now create a new Angular app. And here we are going to use the ng command. Please type ng-new-help. ng-new-help. You are still programming Angular in network and distributed systems, right? Enphase. So you are familiar with this ng command and so on. Please tell me if you are not. I don't know exactly what you do, but I'm sure that you did it before. So run this guy. You can take a look at all the different options. There are a lot of options. I will tell you which options we need today. Now, I ask you to run the following command. I will zoom in a second, okay? ng-new. Let's call it aad-auth, or whatever you choose. That name doesn't matter. --minimum. --minimum, you see it, where is it? --minimal. Oh, not minimum, sorry, minimal. That gives us a very small Angular app without tests and so on, because in this exercise we are not doing automated tests and so on. Please use skip git, because we don't want to create a new Git repository. Please use style CSS, very basic styling. Styling is not on our radar currently. Please use --strict in order that we are forced to build really nice TypeScript code. Then we specify directory. You can see that here, directory. And you specify the name of the directory. I will call it aad-auth. Whatever. This will be the directory that is going to be created. And then you can press enter. Maybe you get a question or so. No, we don't want to use Angular routing. I forgot that one. So answer Angular routing with no, and that's it. So I'll zoom in. Oops, sorry, not here. Here. That is the command here. Yes. Oh, we can be brave. A few moments ago, a new version of the npm package that we are going to use came out. They currently have 0 registered download. Do you want to be brave? Should we use it? Oh, definitely. We should definitely use it. So the next step, for those of you who are already done, everybody who still is waiting, no problem. We will take the time. But everybody else, go into the folder that we just created. You didn't miss anything. Don't worry. Go into the folder that we just created. And then type npm install at Azure / just to make sure that I don't mistype it, here, this one, and no, not this one, sorry, I was too fast, at, and then we are going to use, whoops, I'm going to use this version here. So this is the statement that I want you to execute. Yes? MSAL stands for Microsoft Authentication Library. And guess what? Microsoft Authentication Library - Angular is the Microsoft Authentication Library for the platform Angular. Is there a Microsoft Authentication Library - React? What do you think? I would wish so, but it isn't. That's a big problem. Microsoft is currently offering 2 versions for web development. One for plain TypeScript for any JavaScript or TypeScript-based application, and one specifically for Angular. There is no specific library for React or Vue. So if you build React or Vue apps, you have to use the generic TypeScript library. But for Angular, we have specific support. If everything is okay, you should see a bunch of warnings. We can ignore them. And at the end, 0 vulnerabilities, blah, blah, blah. We have to install a second package in order to make it work, which is called MSAL Browser. Just like before, but this time MSAL Browser. This is the generic package that we are going to use. And if you have that, we have all the requirements that we need. Before the break, we registered the client app in Azure Active Directory, and we have scaffolded a new Angular application. Now it took a few minutes until on every student's laptop the Angular application started running, and now we can try to build our Angular application so that we can access our profile information. That is the idea. Now I have prepared a little bit of code because in practice you will probably just copy this code to make your life a little easier. I ask you to open the file from GitHub that I now share with you. I used Discord to share this folder with you. You have a link. By the way, recently I have learned a new trick for GitHub that I didn't know before. Let me quickly show you that. That might be nice. If you use exactly the URI and you do the only thing here, you change that from github.com to github1s.com. Guess what? You get Visual Studio Code, and you can now browse your GitHub repository just like in Visual Studio Code inside the browser. That's really nice. Did you know that? No. Nice, isn't it? So for some of you, this might be the preferred way of scrolling through code. And for instance, here, if I go to the Angular client source app and I open this one, you see nice syntax highlighting and all this thing. Really nice. I really like that. So you have the choice, 1S, and you get the let's say Visual Studio Code view, and without 1S you get the nice view that you know from GitHub. So the file that is relevant for us right now is this one, msal.ts. So I ask you to open your application in Visual Studio Code. I did that already here. And then go to Source, App, and here in the Source App, please add msal.ts. Essentially, you can choose any name. It was just the name that I came up with. Microsoft Authentication Library.ts. And in this file, we copy the content of the file from my GitHub repository. It's only a few lines of code. It's not a lot of code. Don't worry. We will have to fix a bunch of things, but I give you a minute or two to create that. So msal.ts in source.app, and then you copy this code from GitHub. Please do that. Yes, the code currently has errors. We will fix them in a second, okay? Were you able to successfully copy this code? Could everybody find it? Good? Nice. We will discuss this code in a second. For the moment now, just accept that it's there. It's fine. Okay? Next one. please open in environments the file environment.ts. Then again, go to GitHub, look for the environment file here, and there you have to add currently 2 settings. I will give you the time to do that, so don't worry. We will have all the time of the world. These are the settings that we need. You see here in the environments folder, in environment.ts, we need 2 settings. The first one is the tenant ID. Question to you all. Is this specific to your environment, or will we all use the same tenant ID? Yeah. Exactly, we will use the same tenant ID because we are all using the HTL Leonding Azure Active Directory. What about the client ID? Will we all use the same client ID? No, exactly. So what you have to do is you have to delete this client ID, go to your Azure environment. Where is it? Here is it. Go to your client app registration, and in the overview tab, you see it here? You get the client ID. And this will be different for everybody. So please copy the client ID and copy it into your Visual Studio Code. So I repeat, in environments, environment.ts, and there we specify the client ID, which is individually, which is different for everybody, and the tenant ID, which is identical for everybody. Could everybody copy the correct IDs? Could you find them, copy them? Yeah. Good, very good. So let's go back to Microsoft Authentication Library.ts. A lot of the red squigglies should be gone away. The only thing that is left is this one. It's approximately line 28, something like this. This is for the custom API, and we will do that next week. This is not for this week. So this line of code here, just comment it out. We don't need it currently.
What's the shortcut?
Control KC. And then you shouldn't have any more red squigglies in this file. So let's quickly discuss the structure of the code that we have in this file here. The first part is just imports. We don't need to talk about them, it's just imports. Then we need 2 functions. The first function creates a so-called public client application. The public client application is simply the class from Microsoft which represents a public client. A client that is available, for instance, on the public internet. Okay? This is our Angular app. We have to tell the system what is the ID of our Angular app. This is the ID that you just copied in environment.aid client ID. And we have to tell the system where are we going to log in. And that is at login.microsoft.com/our tenant ID. Last but not least, we tell Microsoft to cache the sign-in information in the browser's local storage. That is fine. Just accept that. That's fine. The second one here is the so-called interceptor configuration. Have you already learned in Angular what an interceptor is? No. You know what an HTTP client is, right? Yeah. Okay. An interceptor is a piece of software that, as the name suggests, intercepts every HTTP request. So whenever you access an API, the interceptor gets active, becomes active, and can change this request before it is sent over the network. And the nice thing here is, with this Angular stuff, is that we only need to tell the interceptor, hey interceptor, whenever you access an API under that URL, please use Azure Active Directory up here to get an access token with these permissions. You don't need to do anything more. So when you can remember, when you quickly think back what we did at the beginning of the lesson, where I told you, here we create a token, this token goes to the client sends this token up here. Do you need to write code for that? No. The library does all the magic for you. That's the job of the interceptor. The interceptor here in the client will recognize, oh, I don't have a token yet. So I will make sure I get a token. And this is done based on the URL here of the API. So you see, it's really not a lot of code. One line, one statement, let's put it that way. And here, 2 statements. Oh, sorry, 3 statements. That's all. We don't need to do anything more. With that, we can start to write a little bit of Angular code, because that was just preparation. And for this week, I don't have a homework yet, because we need to next week we need to add our custom API. But next week, I will give you a homework where you can write your own API and can write a small application, and you can simply take this example code and copy it to your next application and your next application to make it work, okay? It is simple. It is simplified. Believe me, real-world applications have more settings like that. But hey, we are just learning, so it's a good point to start. The next thing where we have to change our app a little bit is in the app module.ts. Please open the app module.ts. Now again, I prepared some code for you in GitHub. So please also go in the app directory and open app module.ts just as I have prepared it. The things that you need to copy into your code are, we need these imports, Microsoft Authentication Library, the HTTP client, you know what the HTTP client is from your Angular teaching, Forms module, you probably know what the Forms module is, and then we need all these providers until down here. These providers are just registering the necessary types for MSAL. Just copy them, you will not change them, just Angular needs them, so accept that and that's it. It's not difficult. So I'll show you again. I take these 3 imports and put them in our app module in the imports here. Obviously, I get a bunch of errors, but I can use the light bulb to auto-generate the necessary import statements. See, light bulb, click. Light bulb, click. Good. And the second thing, the providers. These providers here, okay? Copy. And here in the providers, paste. Guess what? Light bulb. And if you look closely, there is a nice little option here which says add all missing imports. If you click on that one, boom, all the rest quickly should go away. And at the end, if everything works out nicely, you should have, again, compiled successfully, and you shouldn't have any red squigglies anymore. That was the app module. So again, not a lot of code. You have to know what you can copy. If you take a look in my GitHub repository, you will see that I added in many places some additional comments that you can take a look at. But essentially, it's really just adding this MSAL module and adding a bunch of configuration stuff. That's all. Not that complicated. Are we good? Good so far? Any problems? Nice, good. Maybe we will see a login screen before we finish today. That would be really nice. Please take a look at app.component.ts. The first thing that we are going to do in app.component.ts, we are going to remove all this template stuff. Just delete it. That's the default HTML. And I also don't like what the Angular generator generated for me. So what I'm going to do, I will tell, please try to follow along. Here, instead of template, I will say template URL, and I will specify app.component.html. And then here, I will just add a new file. Guess what? app.component.html. It's a little bit, if you ask me, it's a little bit more convenient to work in a separate file than entering the HTML code directly in the TypeScript file. So this is what I did. In the app component, in the add component decorator, I changed template to template URL. Oh, sorry. The arrow is wrong, of course. It should point to here. I changed to template URL and created an empty HTML page, app component HTML. Yeah, it was a false positive. Yeah, it says hello world, everything is fine. So if you get an error, just stop the server, restart the server. This sometimes happens. It's fine. So please give me some feedback whether you were able to do that, create the HTML file. The application should still compile, and you should see in the browser, you should see hello world. Okay, we only have 2 minutes left. If you would like to try it, we don't need to do it today, but if you want, if you are curious how it works, the only few lines of code that you need are these few lines of code, and you should see a login page.
In which file?
It's in app.component.ts. It's in app.component.ts. So we will not do it today. That will be a nice start for next week's lesson. If you want, you can try it. Do you want to try it? Should we try it? Yes. Okay, so let's go to app.component.ts, copy these few lines here, go to app.component.ts and put them exactly here. Then, of course, this should be just an import statement. This should just work. Then HTTP client will be just an import statement. That should work. Logged in, if you take a look, it's just a Boolean variable, very simple. Up here, Boolean variable, you can copy that one. And authentication result is also an import. And with that, all the red squigglies should go away. That's good. Last but not least, put in a button, click, log in, log in, log in. So really just copy the code and now click login. I get a pop-up. I get, you see, this is the permission. Can you remember what I told you? This is the permission. Now the system asks me, the Angular app called this one, Rainer Stropbeck, it would like to access Azure Active Directory and do these things. Are you okay with that? Yes, I am. And now I'm logged in. And next week we will continue because now we get tokens and now we can access our Azure Active Directory. So that was a nice end.
Can we do last part again next time?
Absolutely. It was pretty fast now. We will repeat that so that everybody can try it, okay? Nice. I also have it on video. I will put it on YouTube and I hope this will happen.
Show the HTML file.
The HTML, of course I can. Here it is.